surprise than this. Chapter 833, End him GDK 833. End him living in the northwest region of the Fringe. Polo, the leader of a godhunter faction, had received the payment of 2 million black crystal coins from Little Skeleton. Polo did not show any anger or annoyance about Han Hao forcing the trade right outside of the city, as he had received all the money he asked for. One day, as he was tormenting one of the beauties under his captivity, one of his followers returned to him with breaking news from Ethereal City. My lord Baum is dead. According to the hearsays, the space overgod had razed the entire city lord's manor to the ground. Kodiak, the godhunter who exchanged McKinley's divine body from Baum, bowed and reported to Polo. Polo was flabbergasted and he cried out in surprise, "He what?" The overgod unleashed his wrath upon Baum. The former Ethereal City lord was annihilated along with his manor house, repeated Kodiak. Polo was so alarmed that he stopped humping the beauty underneath him. He said, "I anticipated Baum's death, but I did not expect the killer to be the space overgod himself. This is so unimaginable. What's the situation now in Ethereal City?" Polo thought that McKinley would join forces with Han Hao to kill Baum instead of something so unexpected. McKinley returned to Ethereal City with a divine decree of the space overgod and became the new city lord. My lord, I don't think that McKinley is the kind of person who would do business with us. Him assuming the position of the city lord doesn't seem to benefit us, said Kodiak. Polo threw the beauty underneath him away and said in a deep voice, "Don't care about McKinley. What's most important now is Han Hao. Since he had rescued McKinley, and Han Hao is one of the leaders of our God-Hunter Alliance, doing business with him is not entirely out of the picture. Right? Any news about Han Hao? I'm more interested in him. He delivered us a message through one of his men, asking us about that incident where a caravan of Goldstone Enterprise was raided. We have been asking around, but we have not discovered anything," replied Kodiak. It seems that Han Hao and the master of Goldstone Enterprise have a close relationship. Goldstone Enterprise has branches in every dominion. It is said that they possessed mineral ores that their competitors could never find. If we can build a connection with Goldstone Enterprise, it will be very beneficial to us. Investigate it with all of our resources, find out everything you can about the raid. Report back as soon as you learn a new piece of information, instructed Polo. Understood, my lord. Kodiak bowed and retreated. He immediately left the base with a gang of godhunters. Half a month later, Han Shuo and the party had finally left the territory of the Space Dominion and had officially stepped into the Fringe. The very first thing Han Shuo noticed was just how chaotic the land of chaos really was. There were bloody bodies discarded and left to rot everywhere. Deadly battles were common. There were even godhunters openly devouring other experts as though no one was watching. It was utterly lawless. And this was just the outermost area of the Fringe. As Han Shuo and his party traveled deeper into the Fringe, the scene of battling and murdering became more frequent. There was no order in the land of chaos and no divine guard to maintain peace. People could get into fights for the slightest reason. Not only that no one will interrupt the fight, but most would also watch from the sidelines excitedly. They might even join the fight if they felt that they could steal a kill. For one without sufficient strength, traveling in the Fringe would be the same as walking towards death. This was especially true if one was carrying valuable divine weapons or has attractive looks. One would also likely run into a stronger godhunter cultivating in the same energy and be preyed upon. In the Fringe, there can be countless possible motives for one to be murdered. Han Shuo and the party had finally gained first-hand knowledge of just how chaotic the Fringe was. As they traveled, they gradually adapted their minds to the wretched sight of dead bodies covering every inch of the land. Of the party, only Rose was giving off the distinct aura of a high god. Han Hao wore his callous face while fierce lights dazzled from his eyes. The 5 elite zombies, after having survived on Elysium for many years, no longer looked like weak and puny characters that can be bullied. Therefore, the party did not meet anyone foolish enough to pick on a fight with them. Do not lower your guard. This is just the outskirts of the Fringe. Rose knew the land of chaos pretty well. She constantly reminded throughout the journey, the deeper we travel into the Fringe, the stronger the gods we will meet. As you have seen, All those that we met in the outskirts were merely mid-gods. Those god hunters with mid-god strength dared not roam deeper into the fringe, or they themselves might become prey to stronger god hunters. Given our strength, no one should be stupid enough to start a fight with us, right? Asked Han Huo. He looked like he was itching to get into battle. He would shout and cheer when he saw a fierce battle along the journey. Not for now, but it's hard to say when we are further inside. Rose wasn't as calm and unruffled as Han Shuo and the others. The land seemed to cause her a lot of anxiety. 3 days later, Han Shuo and the party crossed into the inner part of the land of chaos. They started to find that those having fights were of high god strengths. All those high gods had cold and cruel looks. It was as though they might immediately attack a random stranger if they looked at them the wrong way. Han Jin, is this the region where your caravan was raided? Asked Han Shuo after they came to a region filled with hills and mountains. The last time that metal elite zombie was at this place, there were a dozen or more divine guards with him. Every one of the divine guards possessed late-stage mid-god strength. Metal elite zombie had chosen to travel through this region for it was hilly and they were unlikely to come across powerful experts. But despite his careful planning, his caravan was intercepted and the tragedy fell upon them. Yes, father, right in the center of these mountains. Han Jin seemed somewhat sorrowful when he recalled the scene of his workers being brutally murdered. He pointed at a few places as he explained to Han Shuo, over there, and there, I watched my workers being savagely killed. None of them survived. I would have joined them if there weren't any mountains nearby. As Han Shuo traveled into the fringe, he came to realize that in this chaotic land, the strong rules while the weak get murdered. Those who had lived in the fringe for a long time were mostly depraved or sadistic. When they commit murder, they would do so in various peculiar manner and procedures. Some included torturing the victim, inflicting as much pain as possible while keeping them alive for as long as possible. They treated killing as a hobby or entertainment. Han Shuo became very furious when he recalled that metal elite zombie was nearly killed. He released several demon generals and said, let's not travel deeper into the fringe for now. We will stay nearby and ask around. Perhaps we could learn some clues. Rose and the rest of the party nodded and raised no objection. Han Shuo stood straight and as still as a rock. He transformed the few demon generals he deployed into solo travelers of various appearances. As soon as he discovered people traveling in a pair or more, the demon generals would show up and start to provoke them, luring them towards where Han Shuo and the others were staying. After a while, one of the demon generals taking human appearance managed to enrage a party of 7. They charged and followed the demon general without thinking. Then, when the demon general arrived before Han Shuo, it abruptly vanished. Where did that asshole go? Shouted the high god leading the party coldly. Are you bunch a gang with that joker? Han Shuo put on a faint smile and said, hello, messieurs. I'm looking for a few people. Will you be of help? What the fuck? Hand that guy over now or I'll wreck you fucking pantywaist. Rose, who knew the proper manners of the fringe well, charged forward without any warning and straightforwardly killed the few weak henchmen that came with the high god. That high god had only recently become a mid-stage high god. He immediately understood Rose's true strength when she attacked. A shiver traveled down his spine. The fringe, however, was filled with violent, ballsy characters who were not afraid of taking great risks. Although the high god was not sure if he could defeat Rose, he nonetheless angrily shouted, you bitch, you are so dead, and charged at Rose. I whoosh. Slash I the bone spear in little skeleton's hand suddenly shot out. A terrifying sinister energy instantly filled the region. It was shooting at the high god with the might of a doomsday asteroid. The high god was horrified and he immediately made defensive maneuvers. He had a frightened look after the short but perilous exchange. After gazing at Han Hao and Rose for a moment, he asked in a low voice, who are you looking for? The high god knew that he stood no chance against both Rose and Han Hao, and that he would be dead unless he starts being cooperative. Just recently, a caravan was raided and their ores plunder when they traveled through here. Do you know who did it? Han Shuo then asked Han Jin to describe the appearances of those attackers once through. The high god knitted his brows and thought for a moment before he shook his head and replied, I don't know, I've never heard of anything related to it. End him, instructed Han Shuo. He was still wearing a faint smile. Han Hao and Rose immediately started to wildly attack him. The 5 elite zombies also swarmed at him. They opted not to use the penta-elemental undead formation. From how Han Xiu saw it, as Rose had already killed all of the High God's followers, they were destined to be enemies. Therefore, he might as well finish off the High God now, lest he returns someday in the future and potentially causes him troubles. After all, there weren't any laws to follow in the Fringe, and there won't be any consequences for committing murder. But most importantly, this person was a High God, and his divine soul was the best fuel source that the cauldron of myriad demon could have. He saw no reason not to kill the High God. After having traveled in the Fringe for a few days, Han Xiu discovered not a single person worthy of the slightest sympathy. All those in the Fringe were the vilest criminals originating from every corner of the Elysium. They were devoid of conscience and had committed an untold number of heinous crimes. Han Xiu wouldn't feel the slightest thing even if all of these creatures were dead. Rose could easily defeat the High God by herself. And with Han Hao and the 5 elite zombies working with her, the High God couldn't even try to escape. It took just a few moments before little skeleton's 7-bone spurs impaled him. The cauldron of myriad demon hastily flew out and collected the High God's divine soul along with those of his minions. This divine soul could make up for that demon general which was accidentally killed by the space overgod back in Ethereal City. After killing the High God and his gang, Han Xiu did not leave the area but repeated the same modus operandi. He would question all those who fell for his bait before murdering them and collecting their divine souls. But unfortunately, although Han Xiu had asked many, he did not obtain the information he wanted. Just when Han Xiu was going to give up and start traveling deeper into the Fringe, Kodiak, the henchman of Polo, came looking for them after hearing the whistling noises of little skeleton's bone spurs. Chapter 834, we found the culprit GDK 834. We found the culprit when Kodiak arrived. He was shocked to see so many unfamiliar faces around Han Hao. After a moment of careful observation, Kodiak noticed that Han Xiu, Rose, and the 5 elite zombies did not look like god hunters. This had rather confused Kodiak. He wondered what their relationships were with Han Hao. Although his mind was filled with questions, Kodiak said nothing but respectfully greeted Han Hao at first contact. After showing the proper etiquette, Kodiak explained, "Our chief has been paying a great deal of attention to your troubles. He assigned the few of us to investigate around here. It took us a while, but we have found the culprit." Han Hao immediately asked, "Who did it?" Kodiak seemed hesitant and did not immediately answer. Instead, he looked at Han Xiu and the others cautiously and asked, "May I know who you are?" Kodiak wasn't sure if he could divulge the sensitive information in the presence of Han Xiu and the others. Han Hao knew Kodiak's concerns. He lightly groaned and said, "They are my friends, you have nothing to worry about. Don't hesitate. Speak." Kodiak was stunned, and he looked at Han Xiu and the other with astonished gazes. He could not understand how they became friends with Han Hao. Kodiak had heard plenty about LSS reputation and achievements in the Death Dominion. He was a youngster on the up and up in the field of god hunting, and one of the most revered characters among god hunters. None of the god hunters had ever known that Han Hao had friends. Therefore, Kodiak was very surprised to hear those words from Han Hao. After hesitating for a moment, under Han Hao's attentive and cold gazes, Kodiak said in a deep voice, "As I said, after staying and investigating in a nearby region for some time, we have determined who the attacker was. He is called Cage. He cultivates in the energy of darkness and possesses mid-stage high god strength. Right just a few days ago, I heard that he was planning to sell those ores he plundered at a low price." "Where is he at?" asked Han Xiu. He had a faint smile on his face, but his eyes were as cold as ice. After Kodiak arrived, he had placed most of his attention on Rose because he could sense a very distinct aura of High God emanating from Rose. Moreover, he had a vague feeling that Rose was a level stronger than he was. This made him uncomfortable from head to toe, and therefore he had been very mindful of Rose. As to Han Xiu, Kodiak paid no attention to him after the first glance. The demonic art energy on Han Xiu was undetectable when Han Xiu was not utilizing his demonic powers. Those without having a significant level of strength will never be able to detect the terrifying power Han Shuo was hiding. Therefore, Kodiak was unable to sense any threat from Han Shuo and only considered him as an average mid-god. Kodiak was rather astonished when Han Shuo interrupted, for he felt that a mere mid-god was not qualified to interrupt a conversation between two high gods. He put on a trace of annoyance and disdain on his face and completely ignored Han Shuo. He continued to explain to Han how, after raiding the Goldstone Enterprise caravan, Cage and his gang became inactive for a period and stayed inside their underground base. It was only recently that they started coming out to sell off those ores. Han Shuo did not take offense at Kodiak's reaction. He knew that in the end, Kodiak would be telling Han Hao everything. Where is Cage's underground hideout located? How many experts do they have? Do they usually stay inside? Asked Han Hao with a calm face. Over on the east side of Buckthorn Valley, they have around 50 or 60 men. Other than Cage, there are 3 early-stage high gods. Cage would usually stay in his underground base, but in recent days, he might travel deeper into the fringe to sell the ores. I cannot say for sure, said Kodiak. What else do you know about Cage? Asked Han Hao. Cage is a follower of Sovereign Salas. He would pay tribute to Salas every so often. If you want to kill Cage, you better not let anyone find out. Otherwise, if Salas catches wind of it, you will be in a hell of trouble. Kodiak explained to Han Shuo after hesitating for a moment. Salas? Before Han Hao replied, Rose let out a soft cry of surprise. He explained to Han Shuo softly, I have mentioned Salas to you. He is one of the 5 sovereigns of the fringe. He possesses over-god strength. Han Shuo's heart grew a little heavier, and he nodded at Rose in response. There were 5 sovereigns in the fringe, namely, Tyre, Rogers, Asura, Salas, and Wasir. All 5 of them possessed over-god strength, but they do not possess the quintessence. It was needless to say that given their strength, the 5 would command great power no matter where they settle on Elysium. The cruel and merciless sovereigns were the essence of disorders in the land of chaos. Their constant fighting for more power was one of the main reasons that the fringe was so chaotic. The 5 were the most terrifying existences in the fringe, and they always live in the center of the chaotic land. Although Polo was also a powerful figure that commanded a significant number of god hunters, he paled in comparison to any of the 5 sovereigns. Many of the gods who lived in the fringe would submit themselves to one of the 5 sovereigns just so that they can survive. But it comes at a cost. They must offer a large number of valuable goods every year in exchange for their protection. If they do not offer enough, they could risk displeasing their sovereign and be annihilated. Although Cage was a high god, his strength was far, far below that of the sovereigns. He would offer tribute to his sovereign every year. In exchange, if Cage was killed, Salas would avenge his death. And if Cage was killed by a servant of another sovereign, then a bloody war in the fringe would be inevitable. In short, be cautious. If you are to strike, by all means, leave no survivor. Kodiak spoke in a much lower voice when Salas was mentioned. He added, if Cage wasn't related to Salas, my chief would have finished off that guy for you. But unfortunately, my chief dared not offend Salas. Sorry about that? Han Hao nodded and replied, got it. Tell Polo that I will remember his favor. I shall take my leave, replied Kodiak as he nodded. Before he left, he looked at Han Shuo with strange gazes, for he noticed that Rose was very polite towards Han Shuo, as though he was her master. It made him wonder about Han Shuo's true identity. After Kodiak left, Rose put on a rather serious face and remarked, this Salas is an unforgiving and vengeful person. For all the years he ruled the fringe, he had not let anyone get away even for the smallest grievance. We are no match against him. Han Shuo turned to Rose, put on an unruffled smile, and said, don't fret about it. When we strike Cage, neither he nor his gang will take a step out from their underground base. Han Hao suddenly looked intensely at Han Shuo. After hesitating for a moment, he asked, Father, do you have any confidence in winning if you had to fight Salas? Han Shuo stared blankly, bunched his brows, and thought for quite a while. He then shook his head and replied, no confidence. I have never tried it, so I can't tell for sure. Back then, when Han Shuo went to bust a god hunter's base with Erebus and others, they came across an enemy with over-god strength. The terrifying aura that the over-god emanated had haunted Han Shuo even till now. Although Han Shuo had greatly improved in strength since then, he had never fought with an existence of that level, and therefore he didn't know if he could handle it. What a pity that I have yet to enter Skybreak Realm. Once I break through Omen Realm and reach Skybreak Realm, I will have the confidence to fight any overgod. I thought Han Shuo. As he attained greater and greater realms in demonic arts, every bit of progress became slower and slower. Han Shuo had always felt that he was on the verge of a breakthrough, and yet, after such a long time, he had made no progress. Then we need to be extra careful. We cannot afford to make any mistakes once we strike, said LS after thinking for a moment. Come, let's go and take a look at the rabbit hole. Although Han Shu felt that it was regrettable he could not write an overgod, he wasn't all too worried about it. He had prepared himself mentally long before coming to the Fringe, since learning from Rose that the Fringe was filled with powerful experts. Han Shu thought that making further breakthroughs in demonic arts could only be realized while in the Fringe, because almost every previous breakthrough was made under enormous pressure, and when facing enemies much stronger than himself. The land of chaos was filled with such existences. That was one of the reasons that Han Shu went through all the trouble to visit the Fringe. With father around, there's no way we will miss out any, said Han Huo. He became very excited when he heard that they are going to murder and plunder. Han Shuo released demon generals to scout around him as they traveled towards Buckthorn Valley, which Kodiak pointed them to. Along the way, if Han Shuo discovered any gods that he had complete certainty of defeating, he would strike without any hesitation to fill the cauldron with more divine souls. There was a large number of experts in the Fringe, far above any cities on Elysium. During Han Shuo's journey to Buckthorn Valley, the cauldron of myriad demon had gained 3 high god souls and 38 mid-god souls, and that took Han Shuo just half a day. After arriving in Buckthorn Valley, Han Shuo first used his demon generals to scout the environment. After discovering nothing concerning, he nodded to Han Tu and instructed, "Open up a tunnel to the underground." Right away, there could not be any easier task for Han Tu than that. Upon finishing those words, he fused with the ground and sank deep under. The ground before the party's feet soon opened up to form a tunnel. They did not even have to spend time looking for the entrance to Cage's underground hideout. "Let's go, father." Han Tu had completed the task in just a few minutes. He was waving at Han Shuo and the party smilingly. Chapter 835 Murder and Plunder GDK 835. Murder and Plunder, the underground base was made up of many square-shaped rooms stacked uniformly. Some of them were for storing items, and some were for cultivation and dwelling. They were yellowish crystals embedded on the walls glowing with faint and warm evening lights. It was just bright enough to see things. There were various unique defensive boundaries, powered by energy crystals deployed around the base. Cage and his gang survived mainly by raiding the merchant caravans that traveled through the Fringe. They stored the goods they plundered in the warehouse section of their underground base to keep the items safe with them while looking for buyers. The underground base was well defended. There were 2 high god each securing each wing of the underground base. Most of the inhabitants of the Fringe dare not raid Cage's base or even mess with his gang. Not all of them were afraid of Cage, but they were all certainly afraid of Salaz. Cage and his gang had grown bossy and unbridled because they had this enormous figure called Salaz to lean on. They were not afraid of any gods living in the Fringe, save the followers of other sovereigns. Most gods dared not mess with Cage because of Salaz. One after another, demon generals noiselessly flew out from Han Shuo and spread to the entire underground base. They covered every region and every chamber in the base, giving Han Shuo a complete vision of the entire base. It was better than using wall hacks in a video game. After a while, Han Shuo put on a smile and instructed Han Tu, "Seal every path to the surface." Han Tu smiled mischievously before he stepped backward, leaned against the wall, and fused with the soil. After carefully sensing for a moment, Han Shu said to Han Hao and Rose, "Cage isn't in the base, but that doesn't matter. We will kill everyone inside and take everything they have." He then turned to Han Jin and said, "The ores they stole from you aren't in here. It's most likely that they are with Cage." "It's no big deal," Han Jin put on a smile and said, "Let's get these bastards." Han Shu nodded and calmly instructed, "Fire at will. Leave none alive." Han Hao and Rose charged into the base as soon as Han Shuo finished those words. They started murdering in 2 different paths. Miserable shrieks would play wherever they went. Han Jin, Han Mu, Han Shui, and Han Huo also started raiding the base together. They could kill any mid-god in split seconds just by using the bizarre energies on them and their telepathic teamwork. They did not even need to fuse their energies. Han Shuo, however, stood where he was like a rock. He commanded the demon generals he positioned in every corner of the base to transform to their material form of sinister dark shadows and started wreaking havoc. At this time, there were close to 1,000 demon generals in the cauldron of myriad demon. He even had a few dozen demon generals of the highest grade refined using high god souls. Han Shuo could easily cleanse the underground base with just his swarm of demon generals. Even if there were twice the number of gods defending the underground base. Even if Cage was home, they would still stand no chance against Han Shuo and his party. One after another, these followers of Cage shrieked miserably and collapsed. In usual days, they were the aggressors, plundering and murdering the merchant caravans. But now that they were getting a taste of their own medicine, when they saw their accomplices rapidly fall to the enemy, they were terrified. They hastily ran to the tunnel that connected to the surface, trying to flee for their lives. But unfortunately for those people, their only way out had been tightly sealed by Han Tu. Soon after entering the tunnel, they found that it was a dead end and that earth spikes were suddenly growing from the walls around them, and the tunnel was collapsing. Most of them were impaled and crushed to death in a moment. When under the ground, Han Tu's strength would be amplified by several folds. In this situation, even when pitted against a high god, Han Tu would have the confidence to kill the expert by utilizing his environment, making attacks and defenses using the energy of Earth all around him. No one could use the energy of Earth better than he could. Han Tu utilized Earth energy excitedly and made the underground chambers shrink and collapse. Many of Cade's henchmen could not react in time and were squashed alive. Those few who managed to escape from their rooms would find earth walls blocking their paths and trapping them. Before they could escape from the earth walls, an earth dragon appeared out of nowhere and rammed the few mid-gods to death. Han Tu laughed heartily as he maneuvered the earth dragon around. It slithered around the base and massacred Cage's followers who were trapped in their own base. It took Han Shuo and his party just minutes to kill the 50 or so gods in the underground base. Han Shuo had also released his cauldron of myriad demon to collect the divine souls from the dead bodies. We are followers of Lord Cage. His lordship is under the hegemony of Sovereign Salas. What you are doing now is the same as challenging the sovereignty of Lord Salas. You are courting death. An expert with high god strength yelled fiercely when Han Hao pointed his bone spear at him. His heart, however, was quivering in fear. "Where is Cage?" asked Han Hao as he looked at the high god calmly. He did not kill him immediately. "Who are you, bunch? Why are you attacking us?" the high god continued to shout. Han Hao bunched his brows and he abruptly stabbed at the high god. It easily overcame all his defenses, pierced through his stomach, and pinned him on the wall. Then, Han Hao repeated the question, "Where is Cage?" When the bone spear pierced into his stomach, a sinister energy started gnawing on his divine body like thousands of ants. He was overwhelmed with dread and could no longer hide it. He became even more frightened when he saw that Han Hao's eyes were devoid of emotions. He hastily asked, "Are you going to spare me if I answer your question?" Han Hao did not reply. Instead, he gave the bone spear in his hand a little twist. The sinister energy that had been wreaking havoc in the high god's body suddenly swarmed into his brain and filled his mind with inhuman pain. He immediately started shrieking in pain and had forgotten to bargain with Han Hao. He answered tearfully, "He went to Lord Salas with a batch of ores." The bone spear was pulled out from his body and then thrust at his stomach at a steep angle. It went through his lungs, throat, and exited from the back of his skull. Blood gushed out from all the holes on his body. The bright dark cauldron of myriad demon floated towards them like a spirit and quickly covered the person's head, devoured his divine soul that had yet to dissipate, and continued flying all around the base. The cauldron would arrive very promptly right after someone is killed to collect their souls. 10 minutes later, the entire underground base was cleansed with blood. All of Cage's followers were murdered. The demon generals located in every corner of the base gradually flew back into the cauldron of myriad demon. Han Hao, Rose, and the 5 elite zombies started sifting through the goods in every storeroom. The underground base of Cage was piled with all kinds of goods, which included some divine weapons of ordinary value. Most of those things were not useful for Han Shuo or too cheap for him. He only selected some rare medicinal ingredients, precious stones, and certain special hides and skeletons of magical beasts useful for making divine armor. After some time, the party reassembled before Han Shuo. They all had contented smiles on their faces. Han Hao, the 5 elite zombies and Rose were all closely related to Han Shuo, and therefore he would let them take anything they needed instead of keeping it all to himself. In fact, Han Shuo wanted nothing but a short list of items that Han Shuo asked them to collect for him. "Oh, why have you collected so many items?" Han Shuo noticed that the 5 elite zombies and Rose only took several items for themselves, but Little Skeleton had filled himself 2 space rings. Most of the items were not that valuable to Han Shuo. Han Shuo was rather surprised that Little Skeleton would want those items. "Father, although I don't need these, my followers could really use them," explained Little Skeleton. Han Shuo stared blankly for a moment. It was only then he recalled that Little Skeleton had his group of god hunters. It turned out that Little Skeleton had gone through all the effort of collecting all those divine armors and divine weapons to enhance the strength of his god hunters. No wonder he would bother collecting those cheap stuff. "Oh, I see." Han Shuo nodded before instructing Han Tu, "Use your earth energy to move the rest of the items deeper under the ground, so that if we want to, we can get them out in the future. Hee, you might be the only person in the world who could unearth them without much effort." Han Shuo noticed that Han Tu's strength under the ground was much greater than when above ground. After Han Shuo, the person who scored the most kill in the underground base wasn't Han Hao nor Rose, but Han Tu. Han Shuo suddenly realized that the 5 elite zombies could assist him more than with just their strengths. Their special ability to use the 5 yuan energies would benefit him more than he could ever imagine. "Right away," said Han Tu in an innocent smile. Then, without him making any special movement, the entire underground base, save for the region Han Shuo and the party was located, started sinking. To the party, it looked as though they were floating upwards. It didn't take long before all the goods were buried much deeper underground and out of their sight. If Cade returned, he would have to dig a new hole to get back to his underground base. He'd probably think that he got the wrong place, remarked Han Shui laughingly. If Cage returned to Buckthorn Valley, he would surely be very confused when he could not locate the entrance to his underground base. And if he were to take the effort of redigging the tunnel to his base, he would discover that it was empty. It seemed likely he would think that he was mistaken with the location. "Haha, I wish I could see the expression on Cage's face when he returns. Now, let's go visit the Omphalos," said Han Shuo smilingly. They left the underground after Han Tu opened a tunnel to the surface. Chapter 836, The Omphalos GDK 836. The Omphalos on Elysium, the land of chaos, was often compared to a hurricane for all its violence and chaos. However, just like a hurricane, it was calm at the center. The gods in the land of chaos also needed to trade commodities and conduct businesses, but most of the fringe was just too chaotic or unsafe to do so. Even the simplest of trading could hardly be performed. Thus the Omphalos was born, a city located at the center of the fringe. It was jointly managed by the most powerful powerhouses in the fringe, the 5 sovereigns. Every god inside the Omphalos would obey the 5 sovereigns' orders not to fight, kill, or steal. The gods who could not live on any of the 12 dominions for whatever reason can live a very comfortable and worry-free life in the Omphalos, provided that they had a large amount of black crystal coins and could make it through the god hunters and criminals in the fringe. No matter how chaotic and disastrous it gets outside, the Omphalos would stay completely calm and unaffected. All friction and conflict between the 5 sovereigns would be left outside the Omphalos. Many of the raiders and bandits would bring the goods they looted to the Omphalos to sell them off for in the entire land of chaos. That might be the only place where people won't try to rob and murder each other. After all, no one dared offend the 5 sovereigns. However, that would only be true while they were in the Omphalos. They would be on their own as soon as they stepped outside the Omphalos. In other words, even if one manages to sell off their valuable goods in the Omphalos, they would still be vulnerable to getting robbed or murdered as soon as they take a step outside. Inside, only money mattered. Outside, only strength mattered. The Omphalos was a very unique place in the chaotic land for anyone, and everyone's safety was guaranteed. But the temporary safety came at a hefty price. Anyone who wished to enter the Omphalos must pay a large sum of black crystal coins in entrance fees. The longer they wished to stay, the more they must pay. The 5 sovereigns had established this safe zone in the fringe not just because there was a need for such a place, but also because it would supply them with a constant and tremendous stream of black crystal coins. Han Shuo and his party traveled straight for the Omphalos. They finally arrived at their destination 8 days later. During those 8 days, Han Shuo ran into a dozen or more battles of various scales. Some had just 2 to 3 participants, while some involved several hundred experts. There were 5 or 6 groups who attacked Han Shuo and his party, but they were easily butchered by Han Hao and Rose. Han Shuo understood the fringe even better during those 8 days. In this region, where the most heinous criminals from the 12 dominions gathered, morality and ethics were basically non-existent. The strong prey on the weak and life had little to no value. Many criminals would travel across Elysium just to live in the fringe. But before they could go any deeper, most of them would be murdered by gods who had been living in the fringe. After entering the fringe, gods with relatively weak strength must either submit themselves to a powerhouse or spend vast amounts of black crystal coins living in the Omphalos to keep themselves alive. Han Shuo felt as though he was a tiger freed from confinement and released to the wild forests. He would annihilate every party he discovered along his journey to the Omphalos. During those 8 days, more than 200 gods perished to Han Shuo and his party. Among those perished were 10 high gods. The fringe might be a nightmarish land for most people, but to Han Shuo, it is the most wonderful place on Elysium where he could rapidly improve his strength. Han Shuo's base strength was growing in parallel with the number of demon generals within the cauldron of myriad demon. He could sense a minute but significant transformation to the cauldron with each high god soul collected. While waiting before one of the gates to the Omphalos, Han Shuo noticed that it was just slightly smaller than the ethereal city. Its vast territory was covered by a light mist. From a distance, he could see that the buildings were rather scattered and high traffic of gods moving around. Most of those gods had cold and savage looks. There were 5 checkpoints into the Omphalos, one for each of the sovereigns. Han Shuo and his party were entering through the checkpoint controlled by Wasir's men. Those gods had cold and sinister eyes. Their gazes towards those entering were filled with greed, as though they wished to strip everyone of their money. They did not check the divine tablet of those entering or ask about their purpose of travel. All that they asked was 100 black crystal coins from each person. And if Han Shuo and his party wanted to stay longer than 1 day, they must pay 100 black crystal coins for every extra day. After paying 800 black crystal coins, Han Shuo and his party officially stepped into the Omphalos. In most cities of the 12 dominions, one would only need to pay no more than a few purple crystal coins per entry. The price that the Omphalos charged was hundreds or thousands of times greater than an average city for the stay duration of just 1 day. Even if there were less than 5,000 gods present in the Omphalos each day, that would mean an income of 500,000 black crystal coins in a day. Now imagine collecting that amount every day over the course of decades. What an astronomical number. No wonder the sovereigns would bother working together and manage the Omphalos. I thought Han Shuo. Even though his celestial pearl pharmacy was generating him a sizable amount of black crystal coins, Han Shuo was astonished when he made an estimation of the amount of black crystal coins that the Omphalos was generating. Death and murder exist in every corner of the fringe. Those gods with puny strength but possessed a large amount of black crystal coins would live in the Omphalos to survive. They did not mind burning black crystal coins to preserve their lives. With that, the Omphalos became one of the greatest income generators on Elysium. Father, if we could control the Omphalos, we will never have to worry about black crystal coins anymore. Han Hao said softly to Han Shuo soon after they stepped into the city. The city was not all that well defended, but it was filled with frequently patrolling troops of the 5 sovereigns. They were in charge of maintaining order in the omphalos and as tax collectors. Those who had paid the necessary fees would receive a small glowing badge that they must always wear on their chests while inside the omphalos. After 1 day's time, the badge will stop glowing, signaling that the person's stay in the omphalos is over. It must be refilled with a special energy to keep it glowing. When the troops of the 5 sovereigns found any person whose badge was not glowing, they would immediately demand black crystal coins from the person to relight it. And if the person would not or could not pay sufficient black crystal coins, they will be kicked out from the omphalos mercilessly, and will only be allowed to enter the omphalos again once they pay the necessary amount of crystal coins. Han Shuo touched the small little badge on his chest and released a strand of his consciousness to stealthily probe the energy within. However, the energy contained in the badge seemed to be self-aware. Before Han Shuo's consciousness had touched the badge, he sensed wariness from the strand of energy. Han Shuo took a shock. He immediately knew that the little badge must have contained a strand of an overgod's awareness. It was similar to that bizarre, self-aware energy of destruction that previously wreaked havoc in Erebus and Han Shuo's body. Although Han Shuo could easily annihilate that strand of self-aware energy, doing so will immediately alert its creator. By then, Han Shuo and his party might face a disgruntled sovereign and might even risk starting a war. For the moment, Han Shuo had no intention of declaring war upon any of the 5 sovereigns, at least not when he didn't know much about the fringe. He withdrew the strand of consciousness and softly instructed Han Hao and the others, "Do not touch the energy in the badge." After a moment of observation, Han Shuo discovered that compared to most cities in the 12 dominions, the omphalos wasn't all that different. There were streets, blocks, shops, and gymnasiums like every other city, but they were much, much more expensive. Stalls were very commonly seen. They could be found almost everywhere. Most of them were selling goods plundered from others. They can be purchased with black crystal coins or barter traded. Pawn shops were also popular among powerful bandits in the fringe like Cage. Other than that, there was a special occupation found in the omphalos security contractors. It was similar to being a bodyguard or a mercenary. Everyone knew that the land of chaos was chaotic. The chances of one without mighty strength getting killed while traveling in the fringe was just too great. And for this reason, security contractors naturally appeared, promising to protect the contractee's life in exchange for black crystal coins. Most of the security contractors were henchmen closely related to either one of the 5 sovereigns. They provide protection to the contractee by flexing their relative security for being closely associated with a sovereign. A second, less common type of contactor were those with very mighty strengths. It was only under the protection of such forces that one with poor strength and no connection would dare step out from the omphalos. And of course, the asking prices for their services were often absurdly high, going for at least tens of thousands of black crystal coins. However, there were plenty of people who were willing to pay those prices to stay alive. Otherwise, they might be murdered as soon as they stepped outside the omphalos. After strolling around for some time, Han Shuo came to understand the omphalos better. He arrived at a conclusion. In order to live comfortably in the fringe, one must have great strength or a large amount of black crystal coins. Otherwise, only death awaits. "I like this place," remarked Han Hao softly in a smirk after they toured around the city. Rose, who was walking beside him, was taken aback. She looked at Han Hao and thought, This guy sure is like his father, eccentric and unfathomable." Hey, isn't that Rose? Haha, how dare you show your face here?" A peal of very unpleasant laughter suddenly sounded from a distance. An ugly, bald, old woman who was all skin and bones flew towards them. Chapter 837, Wanna Work For Me? GDK 837, Wanna Work For Me? The old woman was all skin and bones. Her skin color seemed to be a mix of zinc and iron rust. The wrinkles on her face were as deep as ravines. When she laughs, the wrinkles were squeezed together, making a tremendous visual impact on anyone who sees it. "I so ugly." Anyone who saw her will automatically think so as goosebumps flood their skin. A very distinct aura of death could be sensed from the old woman who was gently flying toward Han Shuo and his party. She was in mid-stage high god realm. It was rare for one to possess such strength in the Omphalos. She had 7 escorts following behind her. 3 of them possessed early-stage high god strength. They all had sinister and ugly appearances. Most people will definitely not openly speak what they thought of her looks because of her formidable strength. No one would risk enraging such a powerful entity. However, as with most things in the universe, there would always be a few exceptions. Before that old woman arrived, Han Huo shouted as though he was horrified. Holy fuck. What monster? Yuck, I've never seen anything as hideous as that. I need to wash my eyes, cried Han Mu as he put on a disgusted face and put up both hands to block himself from seeing that old, ugly woman. The two were not complete jerks. They had mocked her because they sensed hostility from that old and ugly woman. Bertha, it's you! Rose's face jolted as a murderous light shone from her eyes. The extremely ugly old woman chuckled in a strange manner. Upon arriving before the party, she greeted Rose in a sinister smile before immediately turning to Han Huo and Han Mu and said, "You two youngsters aren't afraid of death, aren't you? You may be safe here, but you better not take a single step outside of the Omphalos because I will make certain of your death." Ugly witch, it's not our fault that you are born ugly. But I must say that I admire your courage and self-confidence. I've never seen anyone as ugly as you walk in the public without a mask or even step outside, replied Han Huo, who was not intimidated by Bertha's threatening words. He then pretended as though he smelled something and remarked, "Yuck, what's that disgusting, stinking smell? Oh, it's from your rotting face." Han Huo then pretended as though he was going to puke. Bertha knew that she was hideous in appearance, but no one would tell that straight to her. That was the very first time that anyone had deliberately mocked her in her face. Bertha was enraged, and she stared at Han Huo like a viper. It seemed as though she was ready to kill. "Bertha, don't you start a fight here," a warning suddenly sounded from a distance. A group of Omphalos guards was gazing at Han Huo and Bertha's party with cold eyes. Bertha, with all her willpower, suppressed the rage in her heart. She looked coldly at Rose and threatened, "I've been looking for you for a long time. I thought that you would keep hiding from me until your death. I did not expect that you have the courage to return to this land. Hee, good, very good. The moment that you and your people step outside the Omphalos is the moment that you will all die." Then, with a twitching, malevolent grin, Bertha looked at Han Huo and Han Mu and said, "And the two of you when that time comes. I will make you two suffer a lifetime for that moment of delight." Bertha then gestured at her escorts and instructed, "Move," before they left. They would look intensely at Han Huo and his party for a moment, as though to remember their faces. "Who is she? What's the story with the two of you?" Han Huo asked Rose after Bertha left. Rose kept gazing at Bertha as she left. It was until her figure had completely vanished that she explained, "Back then, when I was living in the fringe, we used to be on good terms. But one day, his son tried to drug me and I killed him after discovering his plot. Ever since then, Bertha had been trying to kill me and never stopped making me troubles until I left the fringe." "What? With her looks, how is it possible that any guy could do her?" remarked Han Mu as though he was very surprised. "She only looked like this because of a severe injury. Before Bertha was disfigured, she was actually quite attractive looking," answered Rose after taking a glance at Han Mu. "There's no need to be concerned about her. If we run into her outside the city, it is she who will be dead." Han Huo did not take Bertha as a threat at all. A mere mid-stage high god expert was far from enough to do them any harm. "We can fight off Bertha, but it won't be that easy to fight off his man, Buzz," Rose sighed softly and explained. "Buzz possesses late-stage high god strength. He cultivates in the energy of destruction. He is famous in the fringe for his ferocity. He commands a large group of deadly and powerful experts. Bertha, who knew our numbers, will surely notify Buzz. It won't be long before Buzz will reach the Omphalos. Buzz has quite a reputation in the fringe. Most people in the fringe would not make enemies with him. Once we leave the Omphalos, we will be tracked and hunted by Buzz and Bertha." Rose seemed dejected. She looked at Han Huo and said, "I'm so sorry. I have caused you big trouble." Han Huo shook his head with a smile and replied, "Although the fringe is filled with countless fierce and powerful experts, I'm not afraid of any of them. The only experts who could threaten me are the 5 sovereigns. No matter how powerful Buzz is, he is just a high god, so don't you worry. If they do show up, I will show them the consequences of messing with us. Yeah, they are just bitches who had spoiled their son. We ain't afraid of them, consoled Han Huo. Ever since the incident at Ethereal City Celestial Pearl, where Rose held back a group of raiders to allow him and Han Tu to escape, Han Huo's opinion of Rose dramatically improved. Besides, to Han Huo, Han Shuo was the most powerful in the world. He had blind faith in Han Shuo and did not think that anyone could defeat Han Shuo. This blind faith came from his past experiences. He had never seen Han Shu defeated over the many years. He was with him and therefore would only grow more and more confident in Han Shu's power. Father, as long as you can handle that buzz, we will not lose. Little Skeleton was not as irrational as Han Huo. As his strength and intelligence improved, he learned to dissect a problem with clear and sound reasoning. Don't worry about it, we will be just fine. Han Shuo put on a confident smile and said, Come, let's keep strolling around and see if we can get information about Cage. There were people in the Omphalos who specialized in selling information. They were called stringers. If anyone in the fringe wanted to raid or attack any of the merchant caravans who traveled across the fringe, one could learn all the detailed information and plans from stringers. The stringers started out by selling information on that aspect, but over time, they expanded in the intelligence that they would sell. With enough black crystal coins, one could learn just about anything from stringers. After spending 1,000 black crystal coins, Han Shu got hold of Cage's whereabouts from a stringer. He was told that Cage was here in the Omphalos 5 days ago before going to Sala's to offer his tribute. At present, Cage should be on Empyrean Peak. Although the Omphalos was jointly managed by Tyre, Rogers, Asura, Sala's, and Wasir, they normally won't be in the city. The vast territory of the Fringe contained countless mountain ranges, rivers, oceans, and valleys. The 5 sovereigns lived in the most mysterious and treacherous regions found in the Fringe. Sala's lived on the Empyrean Peak, which was 100,000 meters at its tallest point. It was like a broadsword piercing into the blue dome of heavens. The Empyrean Peak represented Sala's exaltedness. His tributaries would travel to the Empyrean Peak annually to pay formal tribute. In normal circumstances, Sala's will not leave the Empyrean Peak. He would only step outside of his mountain when there were situations that none of his subordinates could resolve. When Han Shu learned that Cage was at Empyrean Peak, he knew that it was highly improbable to kill Cage soon. Not only that Sala's was at the Empyrean Peak, but his core and strongest members were also always stationed on the mountain. On top of that, the mountain was covered with a dense array of defensive boundaries. Han Shu knew that it would be irrational to attack the Empyrean Peak with just Little Skeleton, Rose, and the 5 elite zombies. Han Shu had no plan of wrecking the Empyrean Peak and fighting Sala's, for now. He decided to wait for Cage to leave the Empyrean Peak before doing anything to him. Han Shu and his party continued to roam around the Omphalos. Soon after, a gang walked into their path. Their leader has a cold and arrogant face. He was a late-stage high god of darkness. Lady, gentlemen, I heard that you have offended Bertha and Buzz. The leader of the gang asked with his head held high after arriving before Han Shu and his party. Not your goddamn business. Han Hu found his snobbish look annoying and replied to him dismissively. Fool, don't you know that you are on the eve of death? The man coldly groaned and scanned every one of Han Shuo's party with his eyes. Perhaps he thought that Rose was the strongest among them. He looked at Rose and said, Let me remind you, there are only a few in the Fringe who dare offend Buzz and Bertha. The duo is now waiting right outside the Omphalos. As soon as you leave the city, you will be tracked and killed by the duo. So, if you want to live, pay me 1 million black crystal coins. I and my men will protect you and your party as you leave from the Omphalos. How about that? Rose did not reply, but turned to look at Han Shuo. The security contractor was stunned. Being good at reading body language, he immediately realized that he had misidentified the party's leader. He took a moment to carefully observe Han Shuo, but discovered no significant energy fluctuation on Han Shuo. He found the situation rather strange and confusing. Nope, Han Shuo declined the proposal succinctly. That guy did not continue to try selling his service. He nodded in a cold grin and turned on his heels with his gang. He thought that Han Shuo and his party would be dead without a doubt. Hold on, spoke Han Shu suddenly. When the person turned around puzzlingly, Han Shu smilingly asked, "May I know what's your name?" "Haryulai is my name." "So how changed your mind?" Haryulai arrogantly said. "The price is now 1.5 million black crystal coins. No bargaining." Han Shu shook his head smilingly and replied, "You don't seem to be serving any of the 5 sovereigns. You and your followers have decent strengths. How about you work for me?" Haryulai was stunned and stared at Han Shu like a fool. After coming to his senses, he laughed condescendingly and said, "Go and ask around the fringe. All of the 5 sovereigns had tried to recruit me, but I have declined them all. What makes you think that I will work for a nobody like you?" Haryulai then gestured at his gang and said, "Let's leave. This guy must be a nutjob." Chapter 838, GDK 838, Make it big. GDK 838, Make it big. My lord, that guy must be mentally ill. How laughable, that puny little fellow wants your lordship to submit to him. We should finish him off. Haryulai's gang members started angrily cursing after they were away from Han Shu and his party. From their point of view, what Han Shu did was a great insult to their leader, and he should be killed for it. "Lunatic, no wonder Buzz wants to finish them. What a bunch of death-seekers," remarked another of Haryulai's followers in a scowl. He added, "We don't even have to do anything to them. They will automatically be dead after they leave the Omphalos." Haryulai was wearing a dark face. He did not expect to hear that proposal from someone as weak as Han Shuo and was rather offended by it. He was one of the top characters in the Fringe. He had never really lost any battle during his many years in the Fringe, and his reputation was on par with Buzz's. That was the reason he dared to offer Han Shuo and his party protection. He originally thought that Han Shuo and his party will definitely accept his proposal and spend the 1,000,000 black crystal coins in exchange for his protection. Although it was a hefty price, it was nothing compared to 8 lives. However, not only that Han Shuo had immediately declined his offer, Han Shuo wanted Haryulai to work for him. To Haryulai, that was beyond what a sane mind would do. "Lohia, go keep an eye on them. Immediately notify me when they are about to leave the city. I want to watch them die." Haryulai coldly groaned before he instructed one of his followers. A high god of earth nodded and immediately turned to one of the tangled and complicated streets. He tracked and observed Han Shuo and his party from a distance. "I have not heard of Haryulai before, but if he has the courage to go against Buzz, then he must have extraordinary strength. Master, that was a little too blunt." Rose was between laughter and tears. She could not understand how Han Shuo could say that to Haryulai just like that. Haryulai was a character ranking near the top in the Fringe. Before Han Shuo proved that he possessed greater strength, those words will only seem laughable to others. As Han Shuo looked smilingly at Rose, he said, "Only a certain unconventional approach would work on someone as haughty as Haryulai. He will definitely keep an eye on us out of curiosity. Once his curiosity is provoked, he will be drawn to us bit by bit. We are not familiar with the Fringe at all. If we can subdue a local mafia boss like Haryulai, it will be tremendously beneficial to our future operations. Father, Haryulai will definitely be watching us. As long as we can demonstrate that we possess power greater than any average powerhouse in the Fringe, and if Father then makes him a sincere invitation, then it will have a high chance of working," remarked Han Hao after thinking for a moment. To subdue someone like Haryulai whose chin was above his head, one must first make a lasting impression on the person. Then, one must demonstrate to possess far greater strength and power and be superior in every aspect. And if that was followed with a sincere invitation, the chances of successfully recruiting the person will be high. It appeared that little skeleton understood Han Shuo's plan. "Rose, you said that you have some friends in the Fringe. Do you know any who could join us?" asked Han Shuo after he thought in silence for a moment. Rose thought for a moment before she nodded and replied, "I do have some friends, but they don't live in the Omphalos. They do not have that kind of money to squander. We need to leave the Omphalos to find them. However, with Buzz blocking our way, it's not going to be easy. Then we will leave the Omphalos. It's too peaceful here for us anyway." Han Shuo casually looked around before he said to the party while winking, "So there are people carefully observing our every moment. It seems that we are getting popular in the Fringe. Really? You want to leave the city?" Perhaps Rose was too intimidated by Buzz and Bertha. She was acting less straightforward than she usually does. "Yes, let's go," replied Han Shuo. He then started slowly traveling in the direction of a city gate. He could sense that there were several people secretly watching them. They ought to be Buzz and Haryulai's subordinates. The streets of the Omphalos were covered with stalls selling all sorts of items. While traveling towards the exit, Han Shuo would leisurely examine some of the goods being sold. And when he saw an item that he liked, he would buy them straightforwardly. A lot of the merchants in the fringe did not have a clean background. Some of them did not make money by selling goods, but through a devious scheme that only exists in the fringe. The scheme began with the seller determining if their purchaser was rich. Then, as soon as the purchaser leaves the Omphalos, they will be robbed and murdered. Not only that the goods would be repossessed, but the purchaser would also lose all his black crystal coins along with his life. There was a strange phenomenon in the Omphalos. A merchant who sold a valuable item at a very low price would have the same item back on sale at the same place and same price after 1 or 2 days, again and again. Rose was aware of such a scheme. When Han Shuo was purchasing several high-grade soul jade crystals and frigid bone agates, Rose softly reminded Han Shuo, warning him about the scheme of the seller. But not only was Han Shuo not worried about it, he excitedly asked Rose, "Help me look around and let me know if you see anyone doing this trade." Hee, it'd be stupid not to take advantage of this. But as soon as we leave the city, they will swarm at us like locusts. We already have Buzz and Bertha waiting for us. That Haryulai might attack us as well. If we offend other forces now, wouldn't we be completely surrounded by powerful enemies? Rose was used to being a lone wolf, and while she lived in the fringe, all she had sought was her own safety. She would normally avoid making enemies with powerful forces. Therefore, she could not understand Han Shuo's actions. "That is exactly what I want," said Han Shuo in a mischievous smile. He instructed, "You don't have to worry. Just point it to me when you see that kind of shop. If we are to make a scene, we ought to make it big. Otherwise, we won't become famous in the fringe within a short time." Rose sighed in her mind after hearing those words. She thought, I made a mistake bringing him to the fringe. If Master does so, he will surely offend most of the forces in the chaotic land. If hundreds or thousands of experts of the fringe ganged up against us, how do we even escape from that? Han Shuo made out what was on Rose's mind with just one look on her face. He laughed and said, "You have been with me for quite a long time. Tell me, have you ever seen me start a fight that I cannot win? Besides, with these little fellas around, even if the 5 sovereigns came, we will have no trouble leaving the fringe. You have nothing to worry about." Although the 5 elite zombies were not all that great in strength, their talents and special abilities were beyond miraculous. With Earth Elite Zombie, they could bore underground in no time and escape from a legion of pursuing armies. With Metal Elite Zombie, they could traverse across mountains with little effort. With Wood Elite Zombie, they could conceal their auras when traveling through forests. Who will be able to catch them? Well, all right then. Let me show you. Rose did not take much effort or time in finding stalls that conducted that scheme. She covertly indicated to Han Shuo when she found that type of stalls. After taking a moment to observe, Han Shuo noticed that the shop owners indeed had extraordinarily sinister gazes. Their eyes were very attentive to everything that their potential buyer wears. They would observe one's strength, clothing, the capacity of space rings, and expression when withdrawing and paying black crystal coins. Through detailed observation, they could estimate a person's strength and net worth. After making the assessment, they will contact their accomplices outside the city, assemble a team of greater strength to intercept and rob the person. After buying from a few more stalls, Han Shuo no longer needed Rose's guidance. He too could tell which of the sellers were actually raiders. While walking towards the gate of the Omphalos, Han Shuo happily purchased many valuable items that were selling at a greatly discounted price while wearing an amiable smile. He was scheming against the schemers. Gradually, more and more people were following behind Han Shuo. Other than Buzz and Haryulai's subordinates, those who had sold their goods to Han Shuo would also secretly follow behind him. Outside the Omphalos, various forces were busy assembling outside the gate that Han Shuo will use. They were hiding in various locations. "There is a fat sheep to be slaughtered. Brothers, Pay extra attention to this one. That fella has at least a few million black crystal coins. When he was buying things from Fengi, he was seen tossing out a few large sacks of black crystal coins. If we get him, we can take a very long break. Isn't that Buzz's man? Dafuck, how did he receive news as well? It seems that this is going to be troublesome. Hey, Haryulai's man is also following him. How did that fella offend so many people? We better keep some distance and not be rash. Let's see how things go first. Gradually, more and more forces were assembled outside the checkpoint. They were quite familiar with each other. They were wearing dark faces as they were secretly waiting for Han Shuo and the parties to exit the Omphalos. Lord Haryulai, 20 or 30 forces are gathering from every direction. They seem to be targeting the same group of people. Informed a person who was hiding outside the city gate. Haryulai cursed, "Lunatic, that fella is indeed a lunatic. He has drawn most of the fierce characters around here. What the fuck is that guy thinking? Is he trying to get himself killed spectacularly?" Chapter 839, I Want You Dead GDK 839. I Want You Dead, and finally, Han Shuo, the prima donna, slowly arrived at the checkpoint for exiting the Omphalos. When he raised his head and looked around, he saw that a large crowd was hiding outside the gate, patiently waiting for his appearance. "Friend, it seems very dangerous out there. Why don't you stay another night in the Omphalos? It's only 800 black crystal coins. Otherwise, I'm afraid that you will lose your life as soon as you step outside." A guard manning the checkpoint kindly reminded Han Shuo, who was walking at the front of his party with a sympathizing look. The guard had been rather observant and could tell that massive forces were gathering outside the gate. He was very curious about who could have offended so many powerful forces at once, and he managed to learn who was their target through his connections in the Omphalos. Ever since those forces gathered outside the city gate, those who had previously planned on leaving through the gate would either turn around and leave through another gate or just stay in the Omphalos. Han Shuo and his party were the only people who proceeded with leaving through the gate. In addition, as soon as Han Shuo appeared at the checkpoint, he could hear a burst of excited breathing coming from outside. It was clear to him that Han Shuo was the person that those savage gods were after. "Thanks for the reminder, but we will leave the city," replied Han Shuo smilingly. He did not take the guard's warning to heart. The guard nodded and said nothing more. He made a gesture and the gate opened wide, allowing Han Shuo and his party to leave. "What a reckless fool," remarked another guard, and he looked disdainfully at Han Shuo and his party. He had been looking forward to seeing a formidable expert making an entrance, but was greatly disappointed when in the end, it was just a puny gang. "Let's go, don't let them wait for too long," said Han Shuo, and he took the lead on exiting the city. Han Hao, Rose, and the 5 elite zombies followed behind him in order. Other than Rose, no one in the party was nervous. However, they weren't as talkative and cheerful as usual. The yellowish evening light was unusually stifling. When Han Shuo gazed around, he could see groups of gray air emanating from the dense forest and shrubs all around him. Under every ball of the gray air were a group of vicious criminals lying in ambush. It was clear from the faint killing intent exuding from them that they were up to no good. After Han Shuo and his party officially stepped out from the Omphalos, the guard who had given Han Shuo a warning gave him another advice. "If you changed your mind, you may return into the Omphalos at any time. It is always safe inside. I must say that I greatly admire your courage to offend so many forces at once, regardless of your actual strength. I wish you good luck." Han Shuo startled for a moment. He couldn't help but turned around to give the guard another look. He smilingly nodded at him and said, "Thanks. Try not to get too far from the gate or else you won't be able to retreat." The guard gave yet another advice smilingly. Han Shuo did not even plan to turn around. He smiled and started confidently walking further and further from the gate with his party to show that he had no fear. Haryulai, who had been watching Han Shuo from a concealed spot, was astonished. He softly cried out in surprise, "What card does he have up his sleeves?" It's clear that he is aware of all these people wanting to take his life, and yet he is stepping forward boldly. Is he really planning to throw away his life? My lord, they will be dead without a doubt. Of the 8 of them, only 2 are high gods, and they are not even in the late-stage realm. They can't resist a single wave of attack from any of the forces. I'm sure that Buzz and his men will annihilate them in just moments. One of Haryulai's henchmen calmly assessed the situation. As Han Shuo stepped forward, he unfolded his consciousness to observe the forces hiding all around him. As they were just a short distance away, Han Shuo could detect the enemy's auras and strengths without even using his demon generals. He could even sense the feelings of excitement and anxiety of certain people. 26 forces had assembled there. Nearly every one of the forces had at least one high god. The stronger ones would have more than a few high gods. Each high god would have a dozen or more mid-god subordinates. After Han Shuo and his party were a short distance away from the checkpoint, 5 or 6 forces hiding nearby, the area immediately stepped outside to block Han Shuo's road back, denying Han Shuo any chances of retreating to the Omphalos if things went south. That guard manning the checkpoint had been gazing at Han Shuo with his brows bunched. He inwardly sighed when he saw that Han Shuo's retreat path was blocked. He thought, I sigh, now there is no way out for them. Well, I have said all that there is to say. What a shame that they are just so rash. I then, suddenly, all those who had been lying in wait for them came into appearance. A large crowd of ferocious gods surrounded Han Shuo and his party while gazing at them with covetous eyes. At this point, it had become impossible for Han Shuo and his party to turn back. If Han Shuo did not possess formidable strength, there will only be one possible outcome for them: death. It was at this moment that Bertha and a malevolent-looking, purple-skinned bulky man stepped into appearance. Those eyes on his ferocious face seemed to be filled with an infinite amount of hatred as he stared fixedly at Rose. It was as though he wanted to skin Rose alive. Needless to say, that person was Buzz. Buzz suddenly stepped forward from the ring formed around Han Shuo. He raised one hand, looked around, and said in a deep voice, "My fellow friends, I know what you are all here for. I, Buzz, hereby ask you to do a favor. Let me settle my business with them first. There is a debt of blood that I must collect from them. Let me assure you that I'm here only to take their lives, not their black crystal coins. Whatever valuable goods that they had, and how it is distributed will be decided among yourselves." After hearing those words, those smaller forces surrounding Han Shuo spent a moment to consider the proposal. They stood still and gazed at Buzz and his party without saying a word. Their goal was different from Buzz's. The latter was here to take lives, while the former was here to take valuables. There was no conflict of interest between them. In fact, they were quite happy to hear those words, as Buzz will do all the hard work, and they will get all the rewards with no effort. They stood still to indicate their stance and allowed Buzz's followers to surround Han Shuo and his party. Buzz slowly looked left and right with menacing light burning in his eyes. When he saw that those forces gave him a large space, Buzz made a hand gesture as a sign of gratitude and loudly said, "Thanks. I promise I won't take a single piece of crystal coin from their dead bodies." The atmosphere was incredibly stifling. With such a large crowd of ferocious gods gazing at them, even the uninhibited and talkative Han Huo and Han Mu were being unusually quiet. Little Skeleton was tightly gripping his bone spear in one hand. His purple demon eye was glistening brightly. He will immediately begin his massacre as soon as he receives an order from Han Shuo. "Rose, so you have returned to the fringe. Did you think that we would have forgotten about you?" Buzz looked up and down at Rose with his sinister eyes and said, "It was your blessing that my son had fancied you. But not only that you had refused my son's advancement, you had also killed him. He may have not succeeded, but I will. Today, I'm going to slowly rape you in front of everyone here. Even if you commit suicide, I will still defile your dead body." Those perverted barbarians that surrounded them started to chuckle evilly. Their faces were filled with excitement, as though they very much looked forward to the act. In the land of chaos, where there was no moral but only strength, such an atrocity happened all too often. In fact, many of the onlookers were more than happy to watch the process, especially as Rose was extraordinarily beautiful. When hundreds of malicious gazes suddenly gather on her, adding to the terrifying threat that Buzz made at her, a feeling of dread swarmed her mind and her blood ran cold. She couldn't help herself but started quivering in fear. Then suddenly, Rose felt a reassuring warmth on her hand. When she turned to look, she saw that Han Shuo had reached out to hold her hand. Somehow, the warmth quickly spread around her body and chased away the chills. Her body was no longer trembling, and her frightened mind became at ease. It was as though with Han Shu holding her hand, none of the powerful enemies around them could harm her. "Buzz, is it?" Han Shu put on a smile and said, "I will say this just once. Rose is with me. If you try to touch her, I will take your life. I don't care who you are, but I will kill you along with that whore." Buzz did not heed Han Shu's warning at all. He gestured at his followers and coldly instructed, "Kill every last one of them." Buzz and Bertha brought 37 followers, of which were 4 high gods. The remaining of their followers had mid-late stage mid-god strengths. They were fierce and ruthless characters who had committed countless massacres. Following Buzz's commands, the 4 high gods, each bringing 8 to 10 followers, charged at Han Shu and his party from all directions. Of the 4 high gods, 2 were early-stage high gods of death, 1 was an early-stage high god of fighting aura, and the last was a mid-stage high god of darkness. The high god of darkness was charging at Rose. I whoosh! Slash I the 3-meter long bone spear shot out from Little Skeleton's hand and streaked across the sky. It was carrying a terrifying amount of the aura of death as it pierced towards the high god of darkness. Quickly following that, a flash burst from Han Hao's purple demon eye, and he charged at the high god. His arms became as shiny as the tip of a blade, while a surge of killing intent overflowed from his body. The high god of darkness who was planning to kill, Rose, only saw a streak of light before a bone spear came out from nowhere. The terrifying aura of death hit him like a tsunami, crushing the aura of darkness he released. Then, an even more powerful wave of the aura of death burst out from the bone spear. I-kaboom! Slash I the dark cloud made of concentrated aura of death started dissipating after it was hit by the bone spear. It was as though thousands of blades were shredding a large ball of black cotton. Streaks of misty green lights suddenly erupted from the 3-meter long bone spear. The green lights were bizarre and vicious. It had some kind of adverse effect on the soul. Immediately after they shined on the high god of darkness, he turned dizzy and felt weak head to toe. He could not release more than half of his power. Han Shu was amazed. After carefully observing the bone spear for a few seconds, he sensed the presence of necrotoxin within. He was surprised and delighted at that discovery. Chapter 840, I Want You Dead, 2, GDK 840. I Want You Dead, 2, necrotoxin affects both the soul and body. Once the toxins enter one's body, it would be difficult to use even 80% of one's strength. It was very difficult to extract and refine necrotoxin, and even more so to fuse it into a demonic weapon. Little Skeleton had demonstrated his mastery in the arts of weapon refinement by successfully fusing necrotoxin into his bone spear. The necrotoxin had stealthily entered the high god of darkness by disguising under the murky green lights. It affected his divine body and divine soul, not allowing him to unleash his full strength. When the bone spear burst with green light, Little Skeleton had arrived before the high god. He grabbed his bone spear with his hand that was glistening like crystal and thrust it at the high god while launching yet another wave of attacks. Bone arrows, bone prison, corpse explosion spells were also used against the high god of darkness, forcing him to put all his energy on defending himself. It was clear that Han Hao's strength was above his and that he was losing the battle right from the start. Using the bone spear, Han Hao tore and more wounds on his divine body, while necrotoxin continued to ravage his divine body and dismantle his willpower. Over on the other side, the 3 high god and the remaining of Buzz's followers charged towards Rose and the 5 elite zombies. However, with Han Shu standing beside them, they did not feel worried at all. They did not put up defenses, but stood there calmly. Those non-participating forces watching the fight were surprised. They did not expect Han Shu and his party would stay and fight instead of trying to break the encirclement. Haryulai's eyes opened wide and placed all his attention on Han Hao. He was dumbfounded. Haryulai did not expect the average-looking Han Hao to possess such formidable strength, or that Han Hao would have taken the high ground right from the start. That high god of darkness was overpowered and could not even make a single counterattack. The other followers of Buzz had finally closed their distance to Han Shu. They charged at Han Shu and his party from several directions, planning to engage all of them at once. It was at this moment that the cordial smile on Han Shu's face turned even bigger. Suddenly, hundreds of demon generals flew out from Han Shu's body in an instant. The ferocious swarm of demon generals moved as fast as lightning. They spread in every direction and swept at those followers of Buzz. The tragedy that took place in Hushville City was reenacted. The hundreds or thousands of demon generals in their gruesome form bared their bloody fangs and pounced at their victims while making eerie, ear-piercing screeches. Demon generals could change between material and immaterial forms, making it extremely difficult to fight them off. Once the demon generals managed to fly into their divine bodies, it would begin gnawing and consuming them. The victims would immediately feel pain and fear that they will not forget for the rest of their lives. The noise of demon generals eating away their bodies would terrorize their minds as they suffer the hellish torment. Miserable shrieks started playing from the mouths of those people. The hundreds of demon generals annihilated Buzz's army in just moments. Their divine souls were absorbed into the cauldron of myriad demon, leaving behind their rotted divine bodies that had been excavated from the inside. All of the dead bodies lying on the ground were shriveled and looked as though they had been mummified thousands of years ago. There was no blood flowing out from their gaping wounds, nor could it be seen in their flesh. They looked just like old fey zombies that Han Xiu used to summon from the netherworld. They all died wearing expressions of extreme fear and agony and remained frozen in contorted positions. Those forces on the outer perimeter had been happily discussing how they should divide the spoils of war among themselves after Buzz was done. However, when Buzz's followers were turned into shriveled bodies in just moments, they suddenly turned utterly quiet. They were thunderstruck. Harulai, Buzz, Bertha, and all of the observers were wearing the same expression of shock on their faces. Their gazes were gathered on Han Xiu, who was wearing an amiable smile. During Han Xiu's stay in the Fringe, the cauldron of myriad demon had absorbed so much more divine souls that there were finally more than 1,000 demon generals in the cauldron, among which were several dozens of spirit demons. The highest grade of demon general produced from high god souls. Those 30-something followers of Buzz's stood no chance against the swarm of demon generals that was more than 1,000 strong. Other than that high god of darkness, who was still struggling to defend against Han Hao, all of Buzz's followers, including the 3 high gods, had been killed by Han Xiu's demon generals. Still wearing a big smile, Han Xiu looked around and saw the faces of all the observers. He gently cleared his throat, and the large swarm of demon generals rapidly flew back into his body. The enormous and deadly dark cloud completely vanished in a moment. Han Hao, finish him, instructed Han Xiu smilingly. Upon hearing Han Xiu's instruction, the 7 bone spurs behind Han Hao's back suddenly launched away. The energy released by Little Skeleton was once again amplified. The dark cloud around the High God of Darkness was rapidly shredded away by the 7 bone spurs. The High God of Darkness was strained to his limit defending against Han Hao's attacks since the start of the battle. His defenses were immediately overwhelmed by the bone spurs and were pierced by one of the rather short ones. A bizarre transformation suddenly took place. When the bone spur penetrated his divine body, it started to bore deeper as though a living, meandering snake. Quickly following that, the high god's hair could be seen turning white, his skin losing elasticity and his muscle wasting away, all in just a few seconds. But that was not all. His eyes sank deeper into his eye sockets and shriveled. Vitality vanished from his body that was starting to rot. A moment later, the bulky middle-aged man died of accelerated aging. The boundary of aging, one of the trump card boundaries of the death energy, had been released from the short bone spur. Whoosh, the bone spur returned to Little Skeleton. Noises of bone cracking and shattering were heard when the darkness high god's divine body collapsed to the ground. It was clear to see that his vitality had been completely drained. It was also at this point that the observers realized that Little Skeleton had not been using his full strength. A person's plans and expectations usually do not match reality. In this case, Buzz had failed spectacularly. Not only that all of his followers were dead, but they had also died horrifically. Their bodies were all in gut-wrenching states. The battle was over even though Han Xiu, Rose, and the 5 elite zombies had not moved a single muscle. The demon generals that bizarrely appeared had vanished without a trace. If it wasn't for the dead bodies lying everywhere, the crowd watching from the sidelines might even think that the terrifying scene they saw was just an illusion. Just Just like that, remarked Haryulai, who had been observing the fight. His gaze towards Han Shuo was filled with a complex mix of emotions. My lord, I think. I now know why they had rejected our proposal. That follower of Haryulai who thought that Han Shuo and his party would die horrifically said in a bitter smile. He thought, I must be blind to have considered that group of deadly devils as a bunch of feeble lambs suddenly. The other 20-something forces that surrounded Han Shuo simultaneously walked backward with great rapport, giving Han Shuo, Buzz, Bertha, and the others an even bigger space. The few groups that had blocked Han Shuo's retreat path exchanged glances and moved away without saying a word, as though trying to indicate that they did not want to make enemies with Han Shuo. That Omphalos guard at the checkpoint who had been giving Han Shuo warnings and reminders shook his head and laughed. He remarked, so they did not need my advice after all. It turns out that they are formidable experts. No wonder they have the courage to offend so many powerful forces at once. The crowd who had different plans had different reactions, but without a doubt, the Buzz and Bertha couple were the most remorseful of all. The army they wielded and gave them a niche in the fringe for a long time was annihilated in moments. The duo who was now without a single servant suddenly found themselves in a precarious situation. Buzz gritted his teeth. He was ready to go forward for an all-out fight, but Bertha had managed to quickly halt him with her eyes. Bertha put on an amiable smile on her ugly face and said to Han Shuo, Friend, I believe we must have some misunderstandings. Han Shuo couldn't help but himself laughed at Bertha. Huh, misunderstandings? Do we? That doesn't seem to be the case at all. Han Shuo could not be more amazed at just how shameless Bertha was to say those words in front of so many people. We only hold grudges against Rose, but absolutely nothing against you, replied Bertha hastily. She proposed, we have a well-established presence in the fringe. Friend, as long as you promise to leave Rose behind, we are willing to pay you 5 million black crystal coins. Will you do us this favor? Buzz's face turned dark when he heard those words from Bertha. He seemed to disagree with her decision, but did nothing after he was glared at by Bertha. He groaned to indicate that he did not agree. A large number of their experts had been butchered. Not only did Bertha not want to take revenge, but she also offered 5 million black crystal coins for Han Shuo to step away. To Buzz, this was simply a great humiliation. If it wasn't for Han Shuo having demonstrated his astonishing strength just then, Buzz would have ignored Bertha and charged forward to fight Han Shuo. Under Bertha's gazes that were filled with high hopes, Han Shuo smilingly shook his head and replied, My apologies. I don't want your money, I want your lives. Chapter 841, Oh Fight Me. GDK 841, You Fight Me. Those words of Han Shuo's meant that there was nothing left to be discussed. It's a battle to the death. It was at this moment that Han Shuo felt his hand being tightly held by Rose's. Han Shuo turned to her and saw her eyes that were filled with gratitude as well as a few other rarely seen emotions. Perhaps the enormous pressure and stress had caused those emotions to surface. Han Shuo smiled and in a soothing voice he said, It's what I ought to do. You are mine, after all. Thank you, said Rose in a low voice, and a rarely seen smile was seen on her flawless face. Bertha, seeing that there was no room left for negotiation, started laughing maniacally. She said, Outsider, do you really think that we are afraid of you? Even the fringe has its rules. Do you really think that you can just step in here and mess with all of us? We won't let you leave this place alive. Han Shuo did not feel like talking to Bertha. In an impatient face, he instructed Han Hao, Little Hao, kill her for me. Without saying a word, Han Hao immediately charged at Bertha with his bone spear ahead of him and made an onslaught on her. Bertha had just mid-stage high god strength, and she didn't stand much of a chance against Little Skeleton. She was overpowered by Little Skeleton and was on the back foot right after they started engaging. Buzz was enraged. He was not the sort of character who would easily admit defeat. Seeing that Han Shuo had failed to appreciate their kindness of 5 million black crystal coins, he finally couldn't hold back and roared, You think you can defeat us all by yourself? Ha, let's see who will be the last one standing. After finishing those words, Buzz charged forward, not at Han Shuo, but at Han Hao. After having witnessed Han Hao murder his mid-stage high god follower without much effort, Buzz knew that his wife Bertha, who was also a mid-stage high god, was no match against Han Hao. Buzz had no choice but to fight Han Hao with Bertha. Otherwise, if Han Xiuo started attacking him, he knew he would be too occupied to be able to assist Bertha, and she would likely be killed. Han Xiuo swiftly reacted and flew to the space between Bertha and Buzz in no time. Having intercepted Buzz, Han Xiuo raised an index finger and moved it side to side. He said in a smirk, "No, no, no, you fight me." This time, Han Xiuo did not use his swarm of demon generals. Instead, with one thought, the 17 flying swords flew out from his body. They flew crisscross while making eerie, terrifying, and ear-piercing whistles. They released strands of dreadful and vicious demonic energy and corroded everything around Buzz. Now he truly had no time to assist Bertha. When Rose saw Han Xiuo and Han Hao fighting her enemy, she wanted to go forward and assist them. However, she was worried about leaving the 5 elite zombies to themselves. Therefore, in the end, she only stood at the same ground and watched the father and son with burning gazes. Han Xiuo and Han Hao wouldn't have too much trouble defeating Buzz and Bertha 1-to-1. Both the father and son possessed strength greater than the husband and wife. It was to be expected that they would win in a duel no matter which of the couple they were matched against. The 5 elite zombies became completely at ease. The 5 fellas smilingly watched Han Xiuo and Han Hao fight while making comments about it. They were unruffled and were behaving like a non-participant. Using his miraculous bone spear, Han Hao had enveloped Bertha in layers of grayish clouds of death. The 7-bone spur on his back was wiggling as though they would shoot out at any moment for the killing strike. Bertha was appalled. It was only then that she truly realized just how terrifying the teenager was. She sensed the bizarreness of little skeleton's energy of death that was mixed with an even more terrifying and sinister energy. As green lights continued to shoot out from his bone spear, Bertha felt her divine body growing weaker and weaker. Bertha knew that if she doesn't do something to change the situation, she will be murdered by the emotionless teenager very soon. Although Han Xiuo did not know Han Xiuo's true strength, from the strained look on Buzz's face, she could tell that Buzz was in a similar situation as herself. "I know, at this trend, both of us will get killed. Rose, you fucking whore, how did you manage to seduce such a terrifying fella?" I cursed Bertha as she used all her strength defending and racking her brain for a solution. Suddenly, Bertha exerted all her strength and managed to temporarily free herself from Han Hao's constant bombardment. She took the little time she had to shout, "My friends out there, we are in this together. We need to work together and kill these outsiders, these disruptors, or they will erode our footing in the fringe." Those forces who had been observing seemed tempted, but they turned indecisive when they recalled Han Xiuo's miraculous and terrible powers. They were weighing if they should risk their own lives for a chance to repossess their valuables. "I only want them dead. As long as you kill them, I will pay you 5 million black crystal coins. 5 million black crystal coins on top of the valuables, and crystal coins they have are more than enough to be shared among all of you. My fellow fringe dwellers, don't hesitate anymore. If they don't die, our future in the fringe won't be secure." Bertha hastily offered the bounty when he saw that the observers were still hesitant. 5 million black crystal coins was a sky-high amount of money for most of those people. It was an amount that had taken Buzz and Bertha decades to save up. Those cold and detached observers were tempted by Bertha's very generous offer. Suddenly, their eyes lit up and they cast their hungry gazes on Han Xiuo and his party. The temptation of 5 million black crystal coins had made many of them forget about the horrifying power Han Xiuo demonstrated a moment ago. They were ready to gamble with their lives. Some of the forces, meanwhile, realized that what Bertha said was true. If they did not take the opportunity to murder Han Xiuo and his gang, it will be much harder to do so in the future. Besides, it was not in their interest to let a disruptor like Han Xiuo, who messed with their businesses, get away with it. Those forces who had retreated far into the distance once again tightly surrounded Han Xiuo and his party. It seemed that they were determined to slaughter Han Xiuo and his gang by means of their greater number. There were also a few forces who remained where they stood. They weren't one of those scammers, but only there purely out of curiosity. Haryulai was one of them. He was tempted for a second when he heard the 5 million black crystal coins offered by Bertha, but in the end, he decided to stay as he was more interested to see if Han Shuo could do anything against such overwhelming odds. Now he's in big trouble. Even though he's very formidable in strength, it's unlikely he would stand a chance against so many experts, remarked the Omphalos guard, who had been giving Han Shuo warnings repeatedly. Brother, let's kill these disruptors, shouted the leader of one of the bigger forces. As though a rock on a hill that had been given a nudge, the 20-something gangs made up of 1,000 or more notoriously vicious criminals of the fringe simultaneously started fiercely charging at Han Shuo, Little Skeleton, Rose, and the 5 elite zombies. In the usual days, these bandits and criminals were confrontational towards each other, and it would be impossible to see them unite against a single party. The whole region sank into a deadly atmosphere as they murderously stormed toward a common enemy. Buzz was under great pressure when fighting against Han Shuo, and he felt as though he could lose his life to the 17 flying swords at any moment. But when the situation suddenly changed, when those bystanding forces made of 1,000 or more ferocious gods decided to aid him, his confidence swelled. He couldn't help himself but laughed maniacally and cheered. Ha ha ha, you are so dead. Han Shuo decisively retreated from Buzz when those forces started advancing. As he flew back towards Rose and the 5 elite zombies, he released the thousands of demon generals from his body. The demon generals flew out in their immaterial form and spread in every direction. Han Hao and Han Shuo had interconnected minds, and they simultaneously retreated back to the 5 elite zombies. Although Han Hao needed just a dozen more seconds to kill Bertha, he gave up on attacking Bertha without any hesitation. The 5 elite zombies had surrounded Rose in their middle upon seeing that the tides had turned against them. They stood in a pentagonal formation and quietly waited for Han Shuo and Han Hao to return. Sudden, the invisible demon generals that had spread all around transformed to their material form and launched a surprise and wild attack at those fringe dwellers. Those demon generals made using high god souls, meanwhile, were able to attack while remaining invisible. They did not produce even a trace of shadow when attacking the divine bodies of those fringe dwellers. Miserable shrieks and wails started playing as soon as the swarm attacked. With multiple demon generals attacking each fringe dweller at once, those below high god strength would quickly die of having their divine bodies devoured. Demon generals that had tasted flesh will turn wilder and thirst for even more blood. Their energy would also be temporarily boosted, making them deadlier against their next victim. In an instant, 50 to 60 gods perished to the sky of demon generals before they were even close to the 5 elite zombies. Their bodies were also shriveled and frozen in appalling states. The 20-something forces were made up of experts cultivating in all sorts of energies. Those gods who cultivated in the elements of water and fire soon discovered that extreme cold and heat were effective at chasing the demon generals away from their divine body. Those gods who were good with utilizing the energy of the soul also realized that soul attacks were effective against the bizarre lifeform. It took them a while, but the fringe dwellers eventually discovered the weaknesses of demon generals and learned to defend against them effectively. With that, the demon generals could no longer remain divided to maximize their kills. They had to form large groups and attack individually. With that, their deadliness dropped. It was at this time that Han Shuo and Han Hao had finally flown back to Rose and the 5 elite zombies. As soon as they entered the circle, the 5 elite zombies, who had long got into position, immediately activated the penta-elemental undead formation. Chapter 842, Massacre GDK 842. Massacre, the 5 elite zombies had not had a chance to use the penta-elemental undead formation in a real battle ever since they were reunited. Han Shuo held high expectations and was looking forward to witnessing the might of the formation. The 5 elite zombies looked excited. It appeared that they were very confident with the penta-elemental undead formation they had been practicing. Han Shuo, Han Hao, and Rose stood in the pentagonal space at the center of the 5 elite zombies. As soon as the 3 were inside the safe space, the 5 elite zombies activated the penta-elemental undead formation. Earth elite zombie vanished underground. Wood elite zombie fused into a great tree beside him. Metal elite zombie took out his golden cudgel and merged with it. The golden cudgel grew larger and larger until it became a hill of gold. Fire Elite Zombie transformed into a raging inferno, engulfing everything in flame. Water Elite Zombie was covered under a thick layer of ice colder than absolute zero and sat as still as a mountain. Suddenly, the 5 elemental yuan energies started flooding the region. A bizarre transformation started happening to the environment. None of the 5 elite zombies could be seen, but their work could not be more visible. Deep gulches started tearing the earth that had become frigid cold. The air turned into raging fires, while hundreds of thousands of vines were meandering like vipers. Streams of rainbow-colored energies came out of nowhere, and they shot all around the penta-elemental, undead formation. The formation, which covered just several hundred square meters, started to rapidly expand. It was as though the Kraken had been awoken. It was stretching its tentacles, ready to start destroying the world. A frightening burst of energy erupted from the center of the formation and spread outwards. It was like a tsunami of pure energy that will engulf and annihilate anything and everything in its path. Those fringe dwellers charging at the very front were the firsts to be enveloped by the penta-elemental undead formation. They instantly felt an unstoppable, violent power assaulting them, as though thousands of great mountains had crushed on their bodies. All those experts below High God were severely injured in no time, and they started spurting blood. Some of those who had not reacted in time were flattened into bloody meat pies by the enormous power. Chilling winds as piercing as blades whirled around the formation, taking the fringe dwellers into the air. Raging flames carrying tremendous heat then swallowed them, cooking them thoroughly in an instant. A constant thunderous rumble came from underneath the ground that had been rent, while a powerful pulling force emitted from those chasms. Huge rocks would appear out of nowhere and crash down on those fringe dwellers, who had flown into the air, smashing them into the abyss. Miserable shrieks of people suffering inhuman pain played from deep underground. It was as though there was a giant meat-grinding machine down there, mincing all those who fell into it into atoms. Of those fringe-dwelling forces who had been engulfed by the penta-elemental undead formation, other than the leaders of those forces who were struggling to defend themselves, there was no sign of any survivor. Nearly 100 experts were massacred by all sorts of bizarre energies in an instant. Most of them perished with their bodies completely destroyed. The penta-elemental undead formation's area of effect was still expanding, and in the blink of an eye, a few hundred more fringe dwellers crossed into the formation. Just like the last batch, they ended up dying tragically. The 5 elite zombies released a constant stream of their energies, fused them, and transformed it into all kinds of bizarre attacks against the ferocious fringe dwellers. Although none of the 5 elite zombies had attained High God realm, all 5 of them possessed the supreme treasure of their respective elemental yuan energies, which enhanced their power beyond what they possessed. And when they fused their elemental yuan energies using the penta-elemental undead formation, they would unleash a power that was many orders of magnitude greater than their combined strength. Miserable shrieks kept on playing in the formation. Those few faction leaders managed to resist the onslaught only for a few moments longer than their followers could. One after another, they succumbed to the chaotic and bizarre energies. As though the formation alone wasn't deadly enough, the swarm of demon generals joined in on the slaughterfest. They would attack in groups of tens, making those fringe dwellers succumb to the overwhelming power of the formation in an even shorter time. In less than a short few minutes, nearly 400 of the fringe dwellers fell to the penta-elemental undead formation and the thousands of demon generals. Currently, some 200 fringe dwellers were still inside the formation, doing everything they could to resist its power. At the very center of the penta-elemental undead formation, the dumbfounded Han Xiu, Han Hao, and Rose were watching the Armageddon with their jaws dropped to the ground. The apocalyptic power that the 5 elite zombies unleashed upon the fringe dwellers had blown their minds. Although Han Xiu had long known that the penta-elemental undead formation was very powerful, he did not know just how powerful for precise until now. He witnessed just how easily the formation took care of those formidable fringe-dwelling experts. He finally understood why the 5 elite zombies had so much confidence even when up against the horde of fringe dwellers. When divided, the elite zombies might not be able to defeat even the weakest faction. But when they combined their energies using the penta-elemental undead formation, their power surpassed even that of a high god. They would become a weapon of mass destruction that would annihilate any and every living thing around them. As Han Shuo gaped at the scene of utter devastation created by the 5 elite zombies, he thought, this penta-elemental undead formation is so fucking overpowered. The formation had perfectly combined the elemental yuan energies of the 5 elite zombies, amplifying their power exponentially and giving Han Shu a surprise he could not imagine. The formation also had an entangling power. This means that all those ferocious fringe dwellers who crossed into the formation would have a very hard time escaping from it. They could only passively defend themselves against the bizarre, colorful energies that were attacking them in all sorts of strange and complex methods, draining their divine energy and willpower until they eventually perish. Retreat! Suddenly, a resounding roar was heard from one of the leaders of those forces just as his followers were about to cross into the formation. This lucky, observant chief could not tell what was happening inside the formation. All he saw was a wildly revolving mass of grayish air wrapping the region. However, he was alarmed when he saw that none of his fellow fringe dwellers had walked out from the grayish thing. When he shouted, even the other dozen-something remaining factions stopped charging into the formation. They too unanimously turned on their heels and retreated to a distance. There was no longer anyone who dared charge inside recklessly. As the 5 elite zombies did not have unlimited energy, the penta-elemental undead formation could only spread to cover a limited area, and they could only sustain the formation for a limited period. Gradually, the ferociously spinning air slowed down, the flaming sky stopped burning, the stones fell back to the ground, and the dust settled. The fringe dwellers outside the formation anxiously waited for a while. Finally, the penta-elemental undead formation completely dissipated. When the area was no longer shrouded, they saw an unrecognizable land that had been utterly devastated, covered with incomplete bodies and severed limbs. There were also severed heads rolling on the ground. Of those 500 or 600 experts who charged into the formation, less than 30 were still alive. All those survivors were completely exhausted and had a frightened look as though they had just experienced the most miserable moments in their lives. There were bodies, limbs covering every inch of the scorched ground that was filled with bottomless chasms. Enormous rocks of unknown origins were everywhere. Some of them were standing above mushed flesh and organs. There were a few fringe dwellers crushed underneath those rocks who were still barely alive. Blood flowed out from their gaping mouth. Their eyes were filled with helplessness and despair as they slowly faded away. Those lucky fringe dwellers who did not step into the formation were utterly silent as they observed the clusterfuck before them. They felt weak-kneed as shivers traveled up their spines. None of the fringe dwellers cried out in pain or shock. Not a sound came out from their mouths. Thud, thud, slash heavy footsteps as reverberating as drums sounded, trembling their hearts. Han Shuo, Han Hao, and Rose were seen marching forward step by step. Han Shuo's resonating footsteps broke the pin-drop silence and brought the remaining fringe dwellers to their senses. It was then that they recalled an important fact. They were not out of danger yet. Buzz and Bertha, who had been badly injured, looked at Han Shuo and Rose with frightened eyes. Their minds were in jumbles. There was no longer a trace of arrogance or ferociousness on their faces, but only regrets and despair. I did not want to fight you people, but you bunch were just too unreasonable. If you are so keen to seek death, I will grant it to you, Han Shuo said to the shivering fringe dwellers. Then he put on an amiable smile and said, Buzz, Bertha, do you need me to end you myself? The 30-something people who managed to survive the penta-elemental undead formation had crawled behind Buzz and Bertha. The crowd gathered their gaze on Buzz and Bertha upon hearing Han Shuo's words. Then, suddenly, without any warning, all those fringe dwellers behind Buzz and Bertha simultaneously launched a surprise attack at the couple. They couldn't react in time and were struck by those violent energies. They died on the spot. One of the fringe dwellers stepped forward, severed Buzz and Bertha's heads, and tossed it to Han Shuo, who was walking towards them. He said, They are dead. Please do not hold a grudge at us. I promise that I'll never make an enemy with you. Please forgive our offense and spare us. That fringe dweller was an astute person. Although he had survived the penta-elemental undead formation, his body was nonetheless severely injured. He knew that given the circumstances, it was impossible to leave the region alive without Han Shu's approval. Therefore, he had decisively killed Buzz and Bertha in an attempt to get Han Shu's forgiveness. Han Shu looked at Buzz and Bertha's heads rolling to his feet before turning to the person in an amiable smile and said, "It took me a great deal of planning to gather you bunch here. Do you think letting you leave just like that would be part of my plan?" Chapter 843, Demonic Blood, GDK 843. Demonic blood. Those survivors were heart-stricken after hearing Han Shu's response. They realized that they were in deep trouble. At this moment, Han Hao and Rose stepped up beside Han Shu. They gazed at those exhausted fringe dwellers with murderous eyes, ready to start slaughtering away. The 5 elite zombies had vanished out of sight. Other than Han Shu, whose mind was connected with theirs, no one would know where the 5 little fellas were hiding. A hidden danger was always much more terrifying than one that can be seen. Those frightened fringe dwellers thought to themselves, "I damn it, how could I be so blind to offend such a deadly bunch?" Han Shu then deliberately unleashed his aura, causing those survivors to stumble a step backward in fear. With a trembling heart, one of the fringe dwellers asked, "What do you want? Submit to me or be perished," shouted Han Shu using demonic siren boosted by Cauldron Spirit's energy. A bizarre energy hardly visible to the naked eye started undulating like water ripples. The terrifying energy undulation originating from Han Shu seemed to be telling those standing before Han Shu what will happen to them if they resist. The small group of survivors was still afraid of entering the penta-elemental undead formation again. It seemed that the formation had made a lasting impression in their minds. However, they remained indecisive. Retreat! The dozen or so remaining fringe-dwelling forces started dispersing frantically after waking up from their daze. The penta-elemental undead formation had not just intimidated the 30-something survivors, but also those fringe dwellers who were lucky enough not to experience the formation firsthand. From the ravines torn on the ground and the horrifying states of the dead bodies everywhere, they knew just how brutally those not-so-lucky fringe dwellers had been massacred even without seeing it themselves. At this moment, none of the fringe dwellers had any thought of fighting Han Shu. After seeing the small number of injured and exhausted survivors, there was no longer one bit of hesitation in their minds. The dozen-something groups of ferocious fringe dwellers scuttled and vanished in no time. The only forces who did not leave were those who had resisted Bertha's tempting offer of 5 million black crystal coins to participate in the attack. They were the true observers. Haryulai and his gang were one of them. Haryulai's mind at this moment was tumultuous as the sea. He could not believe his eyes when he saw the devastation Han Shu made. Haryulai suddenly felt that he had been foolish and ridiculous to offer to protect Han Shu and his party. There was no way that such a mighty bunch, who could butcher 500 to 600 fringe dwellers in minutes, would need his protection. "My lord, should we also leave this place?" asked a follower of Haryulai. Haryulai shook his head and replied, "We don't. I don't feel any hostility from them. We will stay and watch a little longer. This guy is so good at concealing his strength." He clearly possessed strength beyond that of High God, but he gave everyone the illusion that he was just a mid-god. His arrival could possibly alter the status quo of the Fringe. Inside the Fringe, the 5 sovereigns were the most powerful of all beings. The 5 seemed to have some kind of tacit understanding. They would fight each other while ignoring small forces like that of Haryulai's. It was clear to them that Han Shu possessed strength above that of a high god. Even his followers were incredibly powerful. If such a powerhouse were to enter the Fringe, war and carnage were bound to happen. With war comes opportunity. If Haryulai could join the winning powerhouse before the war, he will gain the most rewards when it's time to divide the loot and give medals. His power and influence in the Fringe will substantially rise, and he will command a bigger force. To Haryulai, this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Han Shu coldly watched as the Fringe dwellers fled in disarray. He did not go after them, because he wasn't done with the 30 people in front of him yet, and he did not have the energy to do so. The 5 elite zombies had spent a large amount of their elemental yuan energies to power the penta-elemental undead formation. It was not possible for them to activate the formation again before spending a long time recuperating their energy. Han Hao and Rose were just 2 people. They could not stop the hundreds of fringe dwellers from leaving. Han Shuo knew that he cannot take everyone down at once and that he needed to do it one step at a time. In the future, as his strength gradually builds, even if he doesn't actively recruit, people will seek to serve him. Therefore, Han Shuo decided that right now, he needed to focus on getting those standing in front of him. The 30-something fringe dwellers had exhausted their energy inside the penta-elemental undead formation. Facing the enormous pressure released by Han Shuo, they started seriously considering their options. Of the survivors, 10 possessed high god strengths and the remaining possessed mid-god strengths. Although the latter had just mid-god strength, other than luck, they must have also possessed some unique abilities and talents, or they wouldn't have survived the penta-elemental undead formation. Han Shuo coldly groaned, and in an intimidating voice, he threatened, "You have no other option. You will submit to my rule, or you will meet your end. Hurry up and decide." Upon finishing those words, the swarm of demon generals transformed into material state and surrounded them as though they were covered by an enormous dark dome. The dense swarm of demon generals was constantly flying about, dancing menacingly. It seemed as though they would descend on them at any moment. I will serve you." Under the tremendous pressure, a heavily injured mid-god's willpower crumbled and became the first to pledge his allegiance to Han Shuo. Usually, after the first person submits, the others would follow. One by one, the injured fringe dwellers stopped standing their ground and gave in. They knelt on one knee with their head low. All those who dwelled in the fringe were the worst of criminals from all over Elysium. They had nil morality or conscience. Those survivors understood that Han Shuo would do something to them to keep them under his control. They lowered their heads and waited for Han Shuo's next action. Drops after drops of blood essences flew out from Han Shuo's palm. They looked as though spherical rubies as they spun and hovered in midair. They then flew to the 30 people and vanished into their napes. Those survivors suddenly sensed that something seemed to have inserted itself into their divine souls. Then, at the next moment, their gazes towards Han Shuo started to turn friendly and respectful. The hatred buried deep under their heat started vanishing bit by bit. "Master," the survivor standing at the very front respectfully kowtowed at Han Shuo. He seemed very sincere. "Master, master." One after another, the fringe dwellers cried and kowtowed before Han Shuo. All of their hatred and resentment towards Han Shuo vanished under the effect of his demonic blood. Han Shuo nodded. He put on a satisfied smile and said, "You may rise. From now onwards, you are all my demon guards. Goron, you will lead them for now." "Thank you, master," respectfully replied the High God of Thunder, who had severed Buzz and Bertha's heads. Of all of Han Shuo's newest followers, Goron was the only expert with late-stage High God strength. Not only that he was formidable in strength, but he was also a vicious person with great acumen. From the fact that he switched sides at the last moment and backstabbed Buzz and Bertha, Han Shuo could tell that he was a person who knows how to adapt to circumstances and therefore most suited for the position. The 30 drops of blood essences that entered their minds would gradually influence their divine soul and make their loyalty to Han Shuo grow stronger with each passing day. The demonic blood will not affect their strength, their intellect, or their ability to make decisions. It will make those people think that Han Shuo was their master without any side effects. Some of you have more followers. All right, I will give you all some time. Return to your bases and gather up all of your followers. I'll give you further instructions later on. You mid-gods who don't have your own base will follow Goron." Han Shuo, standing high and proud, calmly instructed the brand new batch of demon guards kneeling before him. The demon guards stood up, respectfully bowed at Han Shuo before going their own ways, dispersing in all directions. Those mid-gods followed Galan as Han Shuo had instructed. All those standing before Han Shuo vanished in a moment. It was at this time that Han Shuo cast his eyes to the distance. He turned to Haryulai, who had been watching him with shining eyes. Han Shuo put on a calm smile and asked, "Haryulai, are you interested to work for me?" The last time that Han Shuo made the invitation, Haryulai had not just disdainfully rejected him, but he also mocked Han Shuo, calling him a lunatic. This time, however, Haryulai did not immediately respond to the question, and he can't seem to make a decision. In the end, he put on a bitter smile and replied, "I need to think about it carefully. I'm having trouble accepting that I will be treated like how you treat Galan just now. The same day, the same question, but completely different responses. They tried to fight me. That is what they deserved. Han Shuo put on a faint smile and continued, if you willingly submit, you will not get this kind of treatment. You will maintain your full intellect, and our relationship will be very different from that. Haryulai was somewhat tempted by Han Shuo's proposal, but he did not immediately agree. He contemplated it for a moment before he replied, give me some time, I need to think about it carefully. Han Shuo nodded and replied, sure, but keep in mind that the longer you wait, the poorer the treatment you will get from me. Don't take too long. Han Shuo then looked at the few other remaining forces and smiled. He asked, what about you bunch? You have been watching for a while now. Any thoughts of joining my clan? Chapter 844, Leave It to Me GDK 844. Leave it to me most of those gathered around Han Shuo was involved in the scam and were tempted by Bertha's offer. They had been killed or fled. But there were several forces who decided to stay even after Han Shuo displayed his intimidating strength. Most of them had some kind of aces up their sleeves. For example, they could be followers of the five sovereigns. Or perhaps they were confident that they could escape from Han Shuo. Under Han Shuo's attentive gazes, the leaders of those forces exchanged glances. One of them broke the silence. I mean no harm. I came here only as a passive observer. Lady, gentlemen, if you are interested, I can introduce you to Lord Log. I believe that Lord Log will be very interested in you. It was evident from his words that he was a follower of Sovereign Log. The reason that he had stayed until now was to try to recruit Han Shuo and his party for his master. After he made his offer to Han Shuo, the other forces also took their turn and made similar offers. They represented the other four sovereigns Tyre, Asura, Salaz, and Wasir. They asked Han Shuo to consider their offers, promising that he will get anything he wanted in the fringe if he agrees to their offer. The five sovereigns had been fighting each other for many years, and they would spare no effort in recruiting the true top-notch experts. Just then, Han Shuo had demonstrated his extremely valiant strength. If he was to join any of the five sovereigns, he will definitely disrupt the status quo, making one of the sovereigns significantly more powerful. Han Shuo had long expected that they would have the backing of the five sovereigns, or they wouldn't have stayed to watch so fearlessly. Han Shuo smilingly shook his head and straightforwardly declined, my apologies, but I have no plans of submitting to anyone. I believe that the fringe is big enough for me to live without affiliating with anyone. Thank you for the offers. Those representatives calmly nodded, but they did not continue trying to persuade Han Shuo to join them. They had all seen Han Shuo's arrogant and unyielding temperament. They could tell that Han Shuo wasn't the kind of person who would bow before others and did not carry much hope of succeeding, to begin with. After Han Shuo rejected their offers, they bid Han Shuo their farewells. Haryulai bowed very slightly at Han Shuo, and he also left with his men. Moments later, there was no longer a single living being around Han Shuo and his party. All that accompanied them were the dead bodies lying everywhere. Rose, didn't you say that you still have some friends here? Let's go visit them. We currently don't have enough experts and must recruit as many of them as we can. Han Shuo said to Rose after everyone left. Okay, let's go. Rose nodded and was ready to show them the way. Wait! A cry suddenly sounded from the nearest Omphalos checkpoint. In an instant, that Omphalos guard who had repeatedly reminded Han Shuo came into appearance. Han Shuo held a somewhat favorable impression towards that person. Han Shuo smiled at the person who arrived hurried, and in a friendly manner, he asked, how can I help you? You want to learn news about Cage, right? He replied in a low voice. Han Shuo was stunned. He raised an eyebrow and asked, how did you know about that? The stringer that you asked is one of ours. He told me about it. He softly explained to Han Shuo and continued,